the leader of Germany's bid for supremacy in World War II. With the benefit of hindsight, it's quite difficult as we view this archive material to grasp just how much damage this one man could do. And the question always asked again and again is quite simply, why wasn't he stopped? If Adolf Hitler had been assassinated, how many innocent lives could have been saved? But history is rarely straightforward and never simple, and you'll discover as we look more closely at those who did try to rid the world of Adolf Hitler, some actually from amongst his own ranks, why the task of killing this one man was such a difficult objective to achieve. Right from the outset, it's important to appreciate that Hitler was well aware that he was a target for the assassin's bullet, even from the beginning of his ascendancy to power, and he did actually voice how great a risk he believed he constantly faced. One day, a completely harmless man will establish himself in an attic flat along the Wilhelmstrasse. He will be taken for a retired schoolmaster, a solid citizen with horn-rimmed spectacles, poorly shaven, bearded. He will not allow anyone into his modest room. Here he will install a gun, quietly and without undue haste, and with uncanny patience he will aim it at the Reich Chancellery balcony hour after hour, day after day. And then one day he will fire. Hitler may not have got all the facts right, especially as it would be a bullet from his own gun rather than one from a lone assassin that would end his life when he committed suicide as his enemies advanced on Berlin in 1945. But his certainty that attempts would be made on his life were very accurate indeed. The history books are full of Hitler's atrocities and the brave attempts of the Allied forces determined to stop him in his tracks. But ironically, few of us are even aware of the brave resistance in Germany to Hitler's tyranny. In a climate of absolute fear, standing up to be counted, voicing opposition to Adolf Hitler was a dangerous business that cost many their lives. But as the memorials testify, a German resistance did exist and were responsible for the best known of the assassination attempts on Adolf Hitler that on a number of occasions very nearly succeeded. The small group of dedicated freedom fighters who took the brave step to resist Hitler's evil regime and risk all for what they believed in were led in the first instance by Henning von Tresckow, who famously claimed that Hitler was not only the archenemy of Germany, but the archenemy of the world. Von Tresckow's views were very clear, and he demanded that action be taken, not only to neutralize the threat of Adolf Hitler, but also to prove to mankind that there were Germans who were as opposed to Hitler. Hitler's dream of a 1,000-year Reich may well become a terrifying possibility. Evidently, the passionate response Hitler's skill as an orator had on the masses that crowded into the stadiums and arenas to hear him speak didn't only work in his favour, and there were those amongst his own people who saw the dangers that Hitler's lust for power posed. Looking at Berlin and the Reichstag today, which was at the very heart of Hitler's rise to power, it's hard to believe that the remarkable events that happened here back in the 1930s and 40s could actually have been possible. But this was an extraordinary period in the history of the world, and it's impossible to consider Adolf Hitler and what he did without first setting him in the context of the age in which he lived. Hitler's spectacular rise to power in German politics is even more incredible when you realise that he was actually Austrian-born. As a struggling artist in Vienna, Hitler failed miserably and for a time found himself living on the streets. Much of his plight he blamed upon the political climate in Austria, and his deep-seated hatred of the Jews also developed at this time, where he was often in the company of other like-minded anti-Semites. Disillusioned with Austria, Hitler greatly admired Germany, and when he came into a small inheritance, he moved there. And when World War I broke out, he applied for permission to fight for his adopted homeland, and developed a fierce and ultimately dangerous patriotism for Germany. Hitler fought in the trenches of World War I and was even temporarily blinded after a gas attack shortly before the armistice of 1918. However, when news came that the German government had surrendered, Hitler and his like-minded compatriots believed that they had been stabbed in the back by socialists, Jews, and democratic politicians. Matters were made much worse, in Hitler's opinion, when the Treaty of Versailles made Germany accept the blame for the war and pay huge reparations to the victorious Allies. It was a trigger for revolution, and on his return to Germany, Hitler entered the political arena, leading others who felt as stabbed in the back as he did. The result was the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which, with Hitler at the helm, soon became known as the Nazi Party. As early as 1923, Hitler made an unsuccessful attempt to overthrow the German government and was given a prison sentence of 5 years, of which he only served 13 months. Already he had ardent followers, even in prison, one of whom was Rudolf Hess. And it was to Hess that Hitler dictated his book Mein Kampf, which translates as My Struggle. In it, he set out his plan for a German master race, creating a nation where entire social groups would be destroyed, including Jews, homosexuals, and communists, as well as those of ethnic origin. If this wasn't dangerous enough, Hitler also laid out his vision for restoring land to Germany stripped away in the Treaty of Versailles, and expansion of his empire to provide living space, or as he called it, Lebensraum, for the true Aryans he demanded the new Germany be peopled with. Striking a chord with many disgruntled Germans who faced further hardship after the Wall Street crash of 1929 sent the world into economic depression, Hitler's rise to power was alarmingly swift. But right from the very start of his campaign, there were people in his own country who opposed him. It was here, under the arches of the Brandenburg Gate in central Berlin, a place where so much history has been played out, that Hitler and his devoted followers first celebrated his political dominance in 1933 with a torchlit procession through the streets of the city. Coordinated by Joseph Goebbels, who would become one of Hitler's closest associates and the mastermind behind the Nazi propaganda machine, the imposing group met together in the nearby Tiergarten before lighting their torches and setting off at 7 p.m. to the thunderous beat of the drum. With an impressive military display marching through the city, Hitler gave notice of his intention to put Germany back on the world map, in complete defiance of the Treaty of Versailles. But despite Hitler's dramatic show of strength, not everyone was singing the Führer's praises. He may well have been the new leader of Germany. However, the people of the country had not put him there of their own free will. And when you look a little more closely at how Hitler achieved his position of power, it's easy to appreciate why alarm bells were starting to ring. As Hitler had failed to take over Germany by force with a coup years earlier, in 1933 he decided to try more legal avenues to get his Nazi party voted into power. But just days before the elections, on the 6th of March, there was a huge fire that tore through the Reichstag. The Nazis were quick to blame the communists and almost gained a majority, feeding off the frenzy of anti-communist hysteria that the episode generated. It was, nevertheless, enough for Hitler to push through the Enabling Act, and in effect for Germany to become a one-party state, removing all remaining political opposition. Many historians today believe that Hitler and the Nazis were actually responsible for the Reichstag fire. So it's hardly going to come as a surprise that there were German citizens who experienced these incredible events firsthand who were of the same opinion, even if they were in no position at this stage to do anything about it. With nobody now able to prevent Hitler from doing as he chose, he wasted little time in putting his plans for Germany into action. For the master race Hitler dreamed of to be created, he would need to employ the evil process of ethnic cleansing to rid Germany and the nations he intended to conquer of any person who did not fit into his view of perfection, including those who were elderly or the disabled, or simply not of Aryan descent. His persecution of the Jewish race was relentless, as he set about eliminating what he perceived as the problem. And sadly, for a people that throughout history had lacked an official state and already suffered centuries of atrocities, much worse was about to come. Nothing, however, could have prepared the Jews or the rest of the world looking on for what Hitler had in store. And as he progressed in his campaign for a 1,000-year Reich, his crimes against humanity became increasingly more shocking. Firstly, the Jews were ostracized, banned from public spaces, struck off from professional registers, and had their businesses destroyed. As Hitler's power grew, so did his appalling campaign against not only the Jews, but all those he considered undesirable. And he had entire communities banished from towns or put into ghettos, before setting up the horrific concentration and death camps that would result in what history has recorded as the Holocaust, one of the darkest and most tragic episodes in the entire history of mankind. Hitler had snatched power so completely, any of the German people who were shocked and horrified at what they saw happening could do nothing to stop him. Those who did speak out against Hitler soon discovered that his personal army, known as the SS, were dangerously loyal and quickly disposed of anyone who displayed anything but complete adoration for Hitler. With another of Hitler's compatriots from his failed military coup, Heinrich Himmler, in charge of the SS, the brutality with which any dissenters were dealt with proved a frighteningly effective deterrent. But it wasn't only the civilians who were silenced in this way. The German military were unable to question any of the orders they were given, but even in the days before World War II was officially declared, there were those who certainly doubted the wisdom of Hitler's tactics. In a very short time, though, any chance of speaking out was even more restricted when Germany's President Hindenburg died on the 2nd of August 1934. Hitler incorporated the powers of the president with those he already possessed, and forced his officers to swear an oath of allegiance to him personally, rather than the state, forcing anyone with grievances to plot in secret rather than resolve any difficulties with negotiation. As the 1930s progressed, while Hitler was busy engineering his Aryan master race, he also turned his attention to his obsession with Lebensraum, fueling his determination to invade neighbouring countries. The Nazis marched first into the Rhineland and remilitarized this part of the old German Empire. Then Austria and Czechoslovakia soon found themselves under Hitler's control. The Wehrmacht, which was the combined German army, navy and air force, had no choice but to do Hitler's bidding. But with such a long and distinguished history, there were those who disliked the Führer's methods. A number of the more mature regiments still held on to the older, chivalric ways of conducting warfare, a far cry from any of Hitler's ideologies. There was great controversy over the way in which Hitler was invading peaceful countries, and this distressed many of the older army officers. The Wehrmacht, however, had no other option but to follow Hitler's orders. He was their leader, and any challenge would now be considered treason, and tied by the principles of obedience and loyalty, resistance would have to wait to have its day. But opposition to Hitler's tactics was far from being widespread, and many soldiers, sailors and airmen were totally convinced by their Führer's compelling arguments, and were more than happy to fight and die for the cause. It seems incredible now that such a relatively short time ago, a man like Adolf Hitler could rise to such power, not only in Germany but throughout Europe. Every time he snatched more land for his empire, the rest of the world hoped that he'd go no further. But when he forced his way into Poland on the 1st of September 1939, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Neville Chamberlain, gave Hitler until 11 a.m. on the 3rd of September to withdraw his troops. When Hitler failed to do so, Britain, quickly followed by France, declared war on Germany.
At once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist soon.
It's interesting to consider the suggestions that even in the early stages of the war, Hitler faced questions about military strategy from his own troops. And one theory regarding his actions while completing his occupation of France in 1940 is very telling indeed. Hitler's invasion of France came on all sides, with his tanks breaking through the Ardennes forest to the south, while at the same time completely surrounding the British Expeditionary Force, the BEF, along with Allied servicemen from France and Belgium who were in the north, putting up whatever resistance they could. Hitler was on course for a resounding victory as the Allies were forced together towards the beaches of Dunkirk. There appeared to be no escape for them. Then something seemingly inexplicable happened. Just a few miles short of Dunkirk, Hitler called his troops to a halt and provided the Allies with a window of opportunity for one of the most incredible rescue missions of all time. Whether or not he was popular had never been one of Adolf Hitler's concerns. What he was concerned about was effectiveness, and everyone doing precisely as he said without question, whatever the cost to himself or anyone else. Now, on balance, there are many other plausible reasons why the German tanks stopped short of Dunkirk. But in terms of explaining how conspiracies were beginning to develop within Hitler's own ranks, this could be a valid argument. Also, it has to be noted that soon after Dunkirk, Hitler's critics did seem to fall back into the shadows, as the German Führer really did hit the peak of his territorial and social power. By the time the German-French armistice was signed on the 22nd of June 1940, Hitler was totally in the ascendancy, and this support from his people and the Wehrmacht was growing on a daily basis. Hitler had shown nearly everyone that he was the man to make Germany a great power again, and for now, in his supporters' eyes, he could do no wrong. If there was any dissent in the fatherland towards Hitler, it was generally no more inflammatory than a cursed muttering. However, despite Hitler's success and his growing support, there were still small groups of soldiers who didn't believe in the war and wanted to do more than just raise an eyebrow at Hitler. But they knew enough of their leader to appreciate that timing was everything, and patience would have to be a virtue until support for Hitler fell away. One conspirator remarked that there was no point in acting while people sing hosannas. It can only make sense when they scream for Hitler's execution. And as a theory, it had a great deal of merit. Just as the rebels had hoped, as the war progressed, Hitler started to make some serious errors of judgment, and because of this, support for the resistance movement slowly began to grow. Firstly, there was the disaster that was the Battle for Britain, bringing with it huge losses for the Luftwaffe and damaging some of the most evangelical public support for Hitler. The Nazis targeted British naval and Royal Air Forces, so that a land invasion could be attempted, codenamed Operation Sea Lion. To begin with, Hitler's plans appeared to be working perfectly, but when Hitler wanted revenge for British bombings of German cities, he completely changed tactics and lost any chance of achieving his objective. On September the 15th, 1940, after a disastrous daylight raid on London, Hitler had to reluctantly call off all action with regards to Operation Sea Lion. Although this was a huge blow for Adolf Hitler and his plans for world domination, it was a boost for rebels. But this was only the first of a number of contentious issues, and Hitler's plans to invade Russia would put many German servicemen into an impossible situation, where the casualties would be devastating and the conditions they would face truly appalling. Operation Barbarossa was a gross miscalculation by Hitler, as his obsessive hatred of the Russians clouded his judgment, and as the campaign went from bad to worse, audible criticisms were finally voiced about Hitler amongst both the military and the civilian population. Also, misgivings about Hitler escalated as the atrocities that the Nazis were perpetrating against the Jewish prisoners in the concentration camps and Russian POWs began to come to light. Many German soldiers were sickened and disgusted by the actions being carried out in the name of their beloved fatherland, but Hitler had put himself in such a position of power, there was nothing they could do about it. To make matters worse, in 1941, a General Staff instruction was given out that stated, "Bolshevism is the deadly enemy of the National Socialist German people. The struggle requires ruthless and energetic action against Bolshevik agitators, guerrillas, saboteurs, and Jews, and the total elimination of all active or passive resistance." From this point on, The crimes against humanity that were once the province of the SS and Nazi party members were now being forced upon the average German soldier, and many were horrified at what they were being ordered to do. The conspirators had been waiting years for the right moment to carry out an effective assassination plot, and ironically, it was in the German Army Group Center where the most likely group of rebels to succeed formed, under the leadership of Colonel Henning von Tresckow. The colonel had fought courageously for Germany in the First World War, was a lieutenant by the age of 17, and left the military academy as the best cadet of the year. He was a model soldier, and just the kind of man Hitler needed serving the Reich. But his sense of justice was stronger than his loyalty to the Führer. Von Tresckow was shocked by Hitler's illegal actions and the aggressiveness of his campaigns before and during World War II. And although he remained in the army, by 1939 he was already certain that the murder of Hitler was the only way to save Germany and her people from a terrible fate. When he told a friend that, "This will still have an effect in hundreds of years. It will not only be Hitler who's blamed, but rather you and me, your wife and my wife, your children and my children, that woman crossing the street, and that lad there kicking a ball." He was serving notice that the Führer's fear of being assassinated was now more than a distinct possibility. Bravely, von Tresckow set up his staff headquarters as one of the bases for the resistance movement, and appointed a number of close friends and colleagues to cautiously spread the word of what was being planned. Slowly, the conspirators grew in number, until there were enough supporters to begin plotting against Hitler. Every possible method of killing Hitler was explored, ranging from a straightforward shooting to a full-scale bomb attack, while the prospects of destroying his plane or poisoning him were not ruled out. But every attack they launched failed, and only served to highlight just how difficult it was to get close enough to Hitler to kill him. Von Tresckow realised that they needed a supporter that would have close contact with Hitler if an assassination attempt was to be successful, and that was only the beginning, because it would also be necessary to have the backup of a full-scale political coup. It was no good just killing Hitler, as another of the Führer's officers, such as Heinrich Himmler, the commander of the SS, would simply take over where Hitler left off. To save Germany, there would need to be a negotiated peace with the Allies, so a complete power shift was required to quickly fill the void that a successful assassination would leave. With the Russian campaign seriously damaging Hitler's popularity, another major factor came into play when the Americans joined the Allies after the bombing of Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Support for the conspirators increased, but with each assassination attempt that failed, everyone became increasingly anxious, as they knew that the longer they took, the less chance they would have of it ever succeeding. Von Tresckow, by this stage, was leaning heavily towards the idea of assassinating Hitler during one of his visits to the Eastern Front, knowing that on these occasions his target would be out in the open. After 1941, Hitler became more and more of a recluse, and public sightings were practically non-existent. The Führer's fear of assassination meant that wherever he could, he placed himself behind a thick wall of security, so every chance that was missed was getting costlier. Then, in August 1943, a new rebel appeared on the scene, who had the perfect credentials to gain the close access to Hitler that to date had been denied the conspirators. His name was Klaus Schenk von Stauffenberg, and he was a brilliant young soldier who'd also been harbouring a desire to rid the world of Hitler since learning of the atrocities inflicted on the Russian POWs and the Jews and other victims of Hitler's genocide in the concentration camps. Von Stauffenberg had once had great enthusiasm for the Nazi regime, been awarded the Iron Cross First Class, and was considered to be an all-round model soldier. At the start of the war, although he did not agree with all Nazi Party policies, he did remain loyal to Hitler, and when he first heard of rebellious plots in 1939, he was disgusted at the thought of conspiring against Germany. This, however, all changed, because as Hitler made more and more critical errors of judgment and his crimes against humanity escalated, von Stauffenberg lost all respect for his leader and came to the conclusion that Hitler needed to be removed from power. Von Stauffenberg became further convinced after almost being killed in April 1943 while directing a tactical withdrawal from North Africa. The attack by American fighter bombers cost him the use of his left eye, his right hand, 2 fingers on his left, and peppered his back and legs with shrapnel. His doctors didn't expect him to survive the day, but just 3 months later he was discharged with a clean bill of health and a new outlook on life. Von Stauffenberg was convinced that his survival was more than good luck. He believed that he'd been spared for the divine purpose of ridding the world of Adolf Hitler. With his new resolve, von Stauffenberg got to work straight away, and as soon as he'd settled into his new staff role with the Reserve Army in Berlin, he began working on Operation Valkyrie. This top-secret operation was, in fact, a legitimate official emergency mobilization plan, and was even cleared by Adolf Hitler himself. The original plan set out actions that would allow the reserve German army to deal with any possible internal disruptions, from uprisings by the foreign workers to an SS revolt. Military districts across Germany had been given details of this plan, and it laid out how they would join forces with army barracks, training facilities and reservists to secure certain key locations around the country. Using Operation Valkyrie, the reserve German armed forces could quickly calm any disturbance, take control, and ensure that the fatherland remained secure. It was von Stauffenberg's responsibility to update the plans and keep them active, putting him in the perfect position to prepare for a coup. With a little tweaking, Operation Valkyrie would provide Germany with the leadership it needed in the event of Hitler's death, enforcing a state of martial law while a new power structure was put in place. With von Stauffenberg now on side, the coup that the conspirators had been dreaming of finally looked like a reality. Von Tresckow was now confident that power could be seized, and had enough people waiting in the wings ready to take charge of Germany once Hitler was disposed of. Of course, they still had to get rid of Hitler first, and this was proving increasingly more difficult. As the Allies fought back with increasing success, there were numerous assassination attempts made on Hitler between 1943 and early 1944, but still nothing seemed to work. Here, along Unter den Linden in Berlin, they even tried to use history's first suicide bomber to kill Hitler, while he was on the briefest of visits to the Berlin Armory. Rudolf Christoph von Gersthoff carried a bomb with a 10-minute timer concealed in his coat into the armory. And when Hitler arrived, the bomb was activated, and Gersthoff did his best to remain in close proximity to the Führer. But after just 3 minutes, Hitler made his excuses and left by the side door, and Gersthoff was left to defuse the bomb before he was blown apart. Again, the conspirators had been foiled by Hitler's unpredictability and the increasing difficulty of getting close to him. As soon as this plan failed, the rebels hatched another scheme, which would be a bomb plot using a much shorter fuse, but again they failed. Von Stauffenberg constantly offered to play the assassin, but he was considered too important for the implementation of Operation Valkyrie after Hitler's death to risk losing, and also his physical injuries hardly made him an obvious choice. But matters were fast becoming desperate. The Allies were gaining ground at an incredible rate, and also it was rumoured that the Nazi security services were getting close to blowing the conspiracy plans wide open. However, with the end of the war looking close, Hitler became more dogmatic, more ruthless, and the rebels knew that if they could end his reign of terror just one day earlier, they would be doing the world a great service. By June 1944, the Soviets had cleared the Nazis from Russia and were heading towards Germany. The Western Allies had landed in Italy and were starting the liberation of Europe from the south, while in the west, the D-Day landings along the beaches of Normandy were well underway. Thousands of Allied troops pushed their way into France as part of Operation Overlord, and more Germans than ever realised that the war was lost, and it was only a matter of time before the Allies marched into Berlin. Despite the fact that von Tresckow was less active due to the loss of momentum, von Stauffenberg was still determined to implement the assassination of Hitler. The one hurdle that had always dogged otherwise meticulous planning was getting close enough to Hitler to actually kill him. But on the 20th of June 1944, von Stauffenberg received the news that would give the rebels the chance they'd been waiting for. Von Stauffenberg was to be promoted to full colonel, serving as Chief of Staff to the commander of the Home Army. This new role not only meant that he was in charge of raising, training and supplying the troops on the various fronts, but also meant he was required to report to Adolf Hitler personally, and von Stauffenberg was ready, willing and able to make the most of the opportunity. As it was von Stauffenberg's job to send men to the front to fight, he knew that Hitler would want to see him often, as the German forces were now heavily engaged on all sides. With the Allies closing in at great speed, the deployment of what reserve troops the Germans had at their disposal was a matter of supreme urgency. This, of course, was great news for von Stauffenberg, who knew that the more times he met with Hitler, the more opportunities he would have to carry out the task he'd been charged with. The first opportunity came on the 6th of July, when von Stauffenberg was travelling to Berchtesgaden in the German Alps, where Hitler had his country retreat. All von Stauffenberg took with him was a briefcase, which held a few personal items, papers, a change of shirt, and right at the very bottom, 2 explosive devices destined for Hitler. Von Stauffenberg had hoped to persuade a fellow rebel to detonate the bomb during a presentation of new uniforms to Hitler. but his request was denied, and with time fast running out, he realised he would have to personally take responsibility for killing Hitler. Consequently, every time von Stauffenberg travelled to a meeting with Hitler, his important briefcase went with him. But it was risky because he knew he could have been caught at any moment. Sometimes Hitler wouldn't be there. Other times, various important members of the cabinet, who also were to be targeted, were not present. And in an attempt on the 15th of July, after a bomb had been set, it was removed from the room by another conspirator, most likely because Goering and Himmler were not in attendance. Time was running out for von Stauffenberg, and he couldn't afford another missed opportunity. The war was close to a military end, and the SS were also fully aware of the resistance movement, and the pressure was increasing daily. There'd been 3 journeys in just 1 week, with a bomb in the briefcase, risking exposure and certain death, and von Stauffenberg knew that the next opportunity might well be his last. On the 20th of July 1944, another meeting was set up, and this time von Stauffenberg was determined it would be Hitler's final act. The location was to be within the walls of a briefing room inside the perimeter of Wolfschanze, one of Hitler's wartime bases in northern Poland. Just before von Stauffenberg entered the briefing room, he excused himself to prepare for the meeting. With his adjutant, Lieutenant von Haften, he began to arm the bomb that so much rested upon. But von Stauffenberg was interrupted by another assistant, who told him that he was needed in the meeting room straight away, so he quickly placed the live bomb in his briefcase and left to face his destiny. Von Stauffenberg wanted to be 100% sure that this time the assassination would succeed, so he asked to be sat next to Hitler so that he could hear the Führer, blaming his injuries from North Africa for a degree of deafness. It worked, and he placed the briefcase on the floor and then nudged it slightly so that it was only about a metre from Hitler. With everyone present, the meeting finally got underway. But von Stauffenberg would still need to give the order for Operation Valkyrie to begin, so his next task was to escape the briefing room before it was blown apart. As soon as he dared, he left to deal with an urgent phone call to Berlin, and luckily no one grew suspicious. Then, at 12:42 p.m, there was an earth-shattering explosion. As one eyewitness put it, "In a flash, the map room became a scene of stampede and destruction. There was nothing but wounded men groaning, the acrid smell of burning and charred fragments of maps and papers fluttering in the wind." Von Stauffenberg had been waiting for an agonizing 3 minutes for the explosion. And when it finally came, he made his escape to Berlin, believing Hitler must be dead. Now all that he thought remained for him to do was to set Operation Valkyrie in motion, and then the coup would be complete. But there was to be no coup, no early end to the war, and no funeral for Adolf Hitler. Almost unbelievably, the assassination had failed yet again, and Hitler was still alive and well. But as the rebels didn't know this, Operation Valkyrie went ahead as planned. It would be 3 p.m. before the radio orders were sent to all army groups stating that the Führer is alive, in perfect health. And the message also told them not to implement Operation Valkyrie. A short while later, Hitler was completely back to his old self, and apart from temporarily losing the use of his right arm, pierced eardrums and torn clothing, he was practically untouched. It would seem that Hitler's belief that he was invincible was correct, because not only had he already escaped various assassination plots, he had now also escaped a huge bomb blast with hardly a scratch. However, there are far more tangible explanations for his survival. It's thought that after von Stauffenberg left the room, another officer moved to the briefcase next to a heavy oak table support, because it was in his way when he stretched out his legs. The strong support, along with the 4-inch thick tabletop, was therefore able to take a huge amount of the blast, and possibly save any number of lives. Then add to the equation the fact that the room the meeting was held in allowed for much of the blast to disperse through the windows and walls. Had it exploded in an underground bunker which would have contained the force of the bomb, it would have been far more deadly. But lastly, and perhaps most significantly of all, von Stauffenberg only took half the bomb with him into the meeting. In the rush to get to the briefing room, von Stauffenberg forgot to set the second plastic explosive, and worse still, forgot to put it in his briefcase. Chances are, if just one of these things hadn't happened, then the plan would have worked perfectly. But sadly, it didn't, and Hitler's hunt for the rebels began in earnest. It's been estimated that almost 7,000 people were arrested in connection with the bombing, and many hundreds were later executed as a result. A great number of them were hung with piano wire on meat hooks, and their photographs shown to all the military as a deterrent, while others were sent to the death camps or simply shot. Von Stauffenberg was captured a day later on July the 21st, having been betrayed by a fellow rebel. He was simply marched out into a courtyard and killed without ceremony by a 10-man firing squad. With von Stauffenberg gone, the last hope of the resistance movement was sadly put to rest. The coup and accumulation of many years' work had failed, and Hitler was able to drag out his evil war into April 1945, when he committed suicide as the Russians stormed into Berlin. This marked the end of the war in Europe, and VE Day was celebrated on the 8th of May, but it would be September before the Japanese surrendered in the Pacific, bringing this terrible period of world history to an end after 7 years of bitter conflict. Retrospect, even though Operation Valkyrie failed, and many true and faithful Germans died as a result, the resistance did at least show the rest of the world that there were honourable men to be found amongst the most wicked. The brave conspirators who made up the resistance may well have thought that their efforts had been in vain, but they were true to themselves, even if it cost them the ultimate price. Perhaps the last word on the subject should go to von Tresckow, the man responsible for so many assassination attempts on Hitler, and without whose bravery and inspiration many German patriots would never have been given a voice. Shortly before he took his own life, the day after Operation Valkyrie had failed, von Tresckow said, "Now they will all fall upon us and cover us with abuse. But I'm convinced now, as much as ever, that we've done the right thing. In a few hours' time, I shall stand before God and answer for both my actions and the things I neglected to do. I think I can, with a clear conscience, stand by all I have done in the battle against Hitler." And there is no better epitaph for all the conspirators who risked everything during World War II in the name of truth and honour.